Texas 2024. The Foot Locker sat in the corner of the barn where it had been for 30 years. Dust covered the olive drab paint. Rust claimed the hinges. Michael Cole had walked past it 1,000 times without giving it much thought. Just another relic from his father's war. Just another piece of the past best left alone. But his father was gone now, buried 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday morning under the big Texas sky. And the lawyer said there were things to sort through, papers to file, belongings to catalog, the necessary business of death. Michael lifted the Foot Locker lid. It groaned like an old man rising from a chair. Inside, the smell hit him first. Mothballs and canvas and something else. Something like memory preserved in darkness. His father's army uniform lay folded on top, the fabric stiff after 8 decades. The sergeant's stripes still visible despite the years. Beneath the uniform, more layers. Field manuals, mess kit, dog tags on a chain, a silver star in a small velvet box. Things Michael had seen before. Things that told the story everyone already knew. Benjamin Cole, combat medic, 31st Medical Battalion. Saipan 19404, a hero who never talked about being one. But then Michael's hand found something else. An envelope, yellow with age, tucked into the corner like a secret. The paper so thin it felt like it might disintegrate at his touch. On the front, in careful handwriting, an address in Texas, his father's address. And in the corner, Japanese characters. Delicate, precise, beautiful. Michael turned the envelope over. Inside, a photograph slipped out first. Black and white. A young Japanese woman. Maybe 23, maybe 24. Wearing what looked like a hospital gown. Thin, almost skeletal, but smiling. Actually smiling. And behind her, blurred but visible, a white tent with a red cross painted on the side. Then the letter itself. More Japanese characters, columns of text running down the page. Michael couldn't read a single word, but he could feel the weight of them. The importance. This wasn't junk mail. This wasn't a casual note. This was something his father had kept for 80 years. Something he'd never mentioned. Something he'd taken to his grave. Michael pulled out his phone, took a picture of the letter, uploaded it to a translation app, waited. The loading icon spun, once, twice, 3 times, then words appeared, English words. And as Michael read them, his hands began to shake. Dear Sergeant Cole, it has been 50 years. I do not know if you remember me. Michael looked at the photograph again, at the young woman's face, at her smile. Then he kept reading. And as the words filled the screen, he realized something. His father had kept a secret, not a shameful one, not a dark one, but a secret nonetheless. A story about the day America proved the enemy wrong. A story about mercy in the midst of war. A story about a choice that changed 2 lives forever. Michael sat down on a hay bale, the letter still glowing on his phone screen, the photograph in his other hand, and he began to piece together what had happened on a dusty road in Saipan 80 years ago, when his father was 22 years old, when the Pacific burned with war, when a young Japanese woman collapsed in the dirt, and when his father ran toward her instead of away. This is that story. Texas, 1943. Benjamin Cole stood in the kitchen of his family's ranch house watching his mother fry bacon. The smell filled the room like a benediction, salt and smoke and fat crackling in the pan. His last breakfast at home. His last morning in this kitchen that had been the center of his world for 22 years. Tomorrow he'd board a train. Tomorrow he'd become a soldier. His father walked in from the barn, boots heavy on the wooden floor, cowboy boots worn smooth by 30 years of Texas dirt. He hung his hat on the peg by the door, looked at his son, said nothing. What was there to say? They'd already had the conversation. The argument, the resigned acceptance. You sure about this? His father had asked weeks ago. Medics don't carry guns. That's exactly why I'm doing it, Pa. Somebody's got to show we're better than them. Now his mother slid eggs onto his plate, 3 of them, sunny side up, the bacon beside them, coffee in the blue ceramic mug he'd used since he was 10. She didn't look at him, couldn't. If she looked at him, she'd cry, and she'd promised herself she wouldn't cry. They ate in silence. The radio played in the living room. Glenn Miller, In the Mood. The song felt wrong somehow, too cheerful, too light, like the world didn't understand that everything was about to change. After breakfast, his father led him outside. The sun was just clearing the horizon. Orange light spilling across the mesquite and scrub brush. They walked to the barn, to the tack room that smelled like leather and hay. His father reached up to the top shelf, pulled down a box. Inside were boots, cowboy boots, his father's best pair, brown leather, hand-tooled, silver tips on the toes. His father held them out. "You take these." Ben shook his head. "Pa, those are yours. You need them." "I got others. You take these. Wear them under your uniform. Remember who you are." Ben took the boots. They were heavy in his hands, heavy with more than just leather, heavy with expectation, with legacy, with the weight of being a Cole, of being a Texan, of being an American. His mother appeared in the doorway. She held something in her hand, a silver cross on a chain, small, simple. It had been her mother's, her grandmother's before that. She put it around Ben's neck, fastened the clasp. "Do what's right," she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks, "even when it's hard." Ben looked at his parents, his father with his weathered face and calloused hands, his mother with her strength wrapped in kindness. These were the people who taught him what it meant to be good, what it meant to choose mercy over vengeance, love over hate, life over death. "I will," he promised, and he meant it. Saipan, July 1944. The heat hit like a physical thing, thick, wet, suffocating. Ben Cole stepped off the transport ship onto Saipan and immediately felt his uniform stick to his skin. Around him, chaos. Organized chaos, but chaos nonetheless. Trucks rumbling, orders being shouted. The distant crack of artillery, smoke rising from the hills where Japanese forces still held out. The battle had been going for 3 weeks. American forces controlled most of the island now. But control was a relative term. Pockets of resistance remained. Snipers in the trees, soldiers in caves, civilians who'd been told Americans were demons, who'd rather die than surrender. Ben's boots. His father's boots crunched on volcanic sand as he followed the other replacements toward the field hospital. The 31st Medical Battalion, his new home. White tents arranged in neat rows, red crosses painted on every surface, generators humming, ambulances coming and going in a steady stream. Captain Hayes met them at the entrance. He was 42, old for a captain, but he was there because he was good, because he could do things other surgeons couldn't. Ben saluted. Hayes returned it without much enthusiasm. There wasn't time for formalities. There were men dying. "Cole Wright," Hayes said, checking his roster. "Yes, sir. You're assigned to triage. We'll see how you do. Follow me." Ben followed, through the maze of tents, past rows of cots where wounded men lay in various states of broken, some quiet, some moaning, some screaming. The smell was copper and antiseptic and something worse, something animal. The smell of bodies failing. His first day, Ben saved 12 men, stopped bleeding, stabilized fractures, administered morphine, called for surgeons when it was beyond his skill. 12 men who would go home to their mothers, their wives, their children. 12 families who wouldn't get the telegram. The knock on the door, the folded flag. But he also lost one. A kid from Iowa, 19 years old, shrapnel through the abdomen. Internal bleeding too severe, too fast. Ben had tried, pressure, plasma, everything he'd been trained to do. But the kid's eyes went distant, his breathing stopped. And Ben was left with blood on his hands and the knowledge that good intentions weren't always enough. That night, he sat outside his tent, couldn't sleep, couldn't stop seeing that kid's face. Captain Hayes found him there, sat down beside him, didn't say anything for a long time. Just sat. 2 men under the Pacific stars. Finally, Hayes spoke. "You did good today. 12 lives saved is 12 families who get their boys back." "But that one kid," Ben said, "I couldn't save him." Hayes nodded, lit a cigarette. The ember glowed in the darkness. "You can't save everyone, but you never stop trying. That's what makes us different." Ben thought about that, about what it meant to be different, about what his father had said, about what his mother had asked him to do. Do what's right, even when it's hard. Captain Ben asked if it was a Japanese soldier instead of that kid from Iowa. Would you have tried as hard? Hayes took a long drag. Exhaled smoke into the night. I'd like to think so, but I don't know. That's the honest answer. War makes us choose sides, but medicine shouldn't have sides. Every patient is just a body that needs fixing. 3 days later, Ben would find out if that was true. The road, they walked in a line. 15 Japanese women. Prisoners, civilians, survivors of something too terrible to fully comprehend. Ben Cole walked behind them, his medical kit slung over his shoulder. His rifle, which he'd barely touched in training, across his back. Escort duty, not what he'd signed up for, but orders were orders. The women wore torn clothing, simple cotton dresses, brown with dirt and stained with blood. Some were barefoot, others had wooden sandals that were falling apart. They moved slowly, painfully, each step an effort, their heads down, their eyes empty. Ben studied them as they walked, trying to reconcile what he'd been told with what he saw. The propaganda, the training films, the warnings about Japanese cruelty, Japanese savagery. But these women didn't look savage. They looked broken, used up, thrown away. PFC Jackson walked point. He was 19, fresh-faced, scared. This was his first week on Saipan. He kept looking back at Ben, looking for guidance, for reassurance. Ben gave him a nod. Keep walking. We're fine. The road was packed dirt, dusty, cracked under the brutal Pacific sun. It was August, 95 degrees, maybe more. The air shimmered with heat. Ben took a drink from his canteen. Cool water, he'd filled it that morning from the purified supply. He watched the women ahead of him, watched them struggle, watched one woman stumble, catch herself, keep going. Should I give them water? The thought came unbidden. They're the enemy, but they're also dying of thirst. What would Ma say? What would Pa do? He loosened the canteen from his belt, took a step forward, then stopped. Orders were to deliver them to the collection point, not to fraternize, not to show weakness. The Japanese would exploit weakness. Everyone said so, but these women weren't exploiting anything. They could barely walk. Ben was still deciding when it happened. One of the women in the middle of the line, maybe 10 yards ahead, suddenly staggered. Her legs wobbled. She took another step, then another. Then she went down, hard, face first into the dirt, and she screamed. It wasn't a scream of surprise. It was pain, pure agony, raw and animal and desperate. The kind of sound that activates something primal in a medic, something that bypasses thought and goes straight to instinct. Ben ran, didn't think about it, just ran, his boots pounding the dirt, the medical bag already swinging around to his front. Training taking over. Move fast, get there. Assess. Treat. He dropped to his knees beside her. The dust rose around them both. She was curled into a ball, hands clutching at her lower back, tears streaming down her face, making tracks in the dirt that covered her skin. Her mouth open in a silent scream now. No air left for sound. The other women had stopped, formed a circle, protective, scared. One of them, young, maybe 21, moved toward Ben, her hands up, defensive, trying to shield the fallen woman. Ben held up his own hands, palms out. Universal gesture. I'm not a threat. I'm here to help. He pointed at the woman on the ground, pointed at his medical bag, pointed at his own back, trying to communicate. Something's wrong. Let me look. Let me help. The young woman, her name was Haruko, though Ben didn't know that yet, shook her head, said something in Japanese. Fast, urgent, pleading. Ben didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Don't hurt her. Please don't hurt her. I'm a medic, Ben said, knowing she couldn't understand, but needing to say it anyway. I want to help. He moved slowly, carefully, reached out and touched the fallen woman's shoulder. She flinched, pulled away. But the movement made her scream again, and that scream decided everything. Ben pulled his stethoscope from his bag, showed it to Haruko, let her see what it was. Then he gently rolled the fallen woman onto her side. She resisted at first, then went limp, either too weak to fight or too broken to care. He listened to her heartbeat, fast, thready, classic signs of shock. He checked her pupils, dilated, unresponsive, not good. He ran his hands along her spine. Professional, clinical. When he reached her lower back, she screamed again. And he felt it. The misalignment, the swelling. Something pressing where it shouldn't be. Spinal compression. Maybe a fracture. Maybe worse. If he didn't get her help soon, she'd be paralyzed, if she wasn't already. Ben pulled the radio from his belt, keyed the mic. "Base, this is Cole. I need an ambulance. Japanese prisoner collapsed. Possible spinal injury. Can't walk." Static. Then a voice, Corporal Davis from command. "Confirm, you want an ambulance for a PO." Ben Ohan looked at the woman, at her twisted body, at her face contorted in pain. He thought about that kid from Iowa, about the 12 men he'd saved, about what Captain Hayes had said, about what made them different. "She's a patient," Ben said into the radio, his voice firm, clear, no doubt. "Send the ambulance, now." More static. A pause, then "Roger that. Ambulance inbound. ETA 10 minutes. Ben clipped the radio back to his belt. Looked up at Haruko, at the other women standing in their protective circle. He couldn't explain to them what he'd done. Couldn't tell them help was coming. But maybe his actions spoke louder than any words could. He opened his medical bag. The woman on the ground was still conscious. Still in agony, he could see it in her eyes. The pain radiating out from her spine, consuming everything, making every breath an act of will. Ben pulled out the morphine syringe, small, simple, the solution in a tiny glass tube. He held it up. Let the women see it. Let them see what he was about to do. Because this moment mattered. This moment would determine whether they saw him as savior or executioner. The women saw the needle. Several gasped, stepped back. One of them, older, said something sharp, an order, or a warning. Ben caught one word repeated several times, a word that sounded like poison in any language. He had to make them understand, had to show them. Ben pointed at the syringe, then at his own arm, made an injection motion, then rubbed his arm and smiled, pointed at the woman on the ground. Then at the syringe again, made the same motion, then pointed at his smile. Medicine, not poison, for pain, to help. But they didn't believe him. Why would they? They'd been told Americans were monsters, that surrender meant torture and death. Everything they knew said this was the end, that this ejection was how they'd kill her. Quick, efficient. Then the rest of them would follow. One woman older than the others, maybe 35, stepped forward. She had intelligent eyes, careful eyes. She studied Ben's face, studied the syringe, then said something to the others. A question. A debate began. Urgent whispers in Japanese. Ben caught the occasional gesture toward him, toward the fallen woman, toward the syringe. Then the older woman spoke. Just one word. Clear, decisive. A word Ben would later learn meant morphine. The woman pointed at herself, then at Ben, then at the needle, her meaning clear. "Show me. Prove it's not poison. Use it on me first." Ben hesitated. He couldn't give morphine to someone who didn't need it. It was against every protocol, every rule. But these women weren't going to let him help their friend unless he proved himself, unless he showed them beyond doubt that his intentions were pure. Before he could decide, the older woman Emiko was, her name bent down beside the injured woman. She spoke to her, soft words, reassuring words. The injured woman, Reiko, looked up, at Emiko, at Ben, at the syringe in his hand. Then she nodded. Just once, a tiny movement, but it was consent. Ben didn't wait, couldn't. Every second mattered. He tore open the syringe packaging, found a vein in Reiko's arm, inserted the needle, pushed the plunger. The morphine entered her bloodstream. Quick, efficient, professional. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Reiko lay there, breathing hard, eyes wide with fear, waiting for death. The other women watched, silent, frozen, waiting to see if their worst fears were confirmed. Then Reiko's face changed. The tension eased. The lines of pain softened. Her breathing slowed. Steadied, she blinked. Once, twice. Then she spoke. Just a few words, but the tone was unmistakable. Surprise, relief, wonder. The women exhaled collectively. Some started crying, others dropped to their knees. Haruko grabbed Reiko's hand, held it tight, said something that sounded like, "Thank God, thank God, thank God." Ben sat back on his heels. His hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. He'd done it. He'd helped her. But the hard part was still coming. The surgery, the recovery, the questions about why he'd chosen to save an enemy prisoner when American boys were still dying. But in that moment, with the morphine taking effect and Reiko's face finally relaxing into something like peace, Ben knew he'd made the right choice. His mother had asked him to do what was right, even when it was hard. This was hard. This was choosing to see a patient instead of an enemy, a person instead of a problem, a life worth saving instead of a war worth winning. In the distance, he heard the sound of an engine, the ambulance, coming fast, kicking up dust on the dirt road. Help was on the way, and Ben realized something. This woman on the ground, this enemy prisoner, had just reminded him why he'd become a medic in the first place. Not to take sides, not to win wars, but to save lives. Lives, every life. Because in the end, that's what made America different. Not our weapons, not our strategy, not our superior numbers or industrial might, but our willingness to show mercy even when mercy wasn't deserved. To choose compassion even when cruelty would be easier. To save our enemies because that's what good people do. The ambulance pulled up. Captain Hayes jumped out with another medic. He took one look at the scene, at Ben kneeling beside Reiko, at the empty morphine syringe, at the circle of Japanese women. His eyes met Ben's. "Spinal compression," Ben reported. "Administered morphine. She needs surgery, soon." Hayes knelt down, did his own quick assessment, felt Reiko's back, saw her response, stood up and looked at Ben again. "You called an ambulance for a Japanese prisoner." It wasn't a question, but Ben answered anyway. "Yes, sir, she's a patient." Hayes was quiet for a moment, then he nodded. "Get her on the stretcher. Carefully. We'll take her back to the hospital." As they loaded Reiko onto the stretcher, as the other women watched in continued disbelief, as Hayes climbed back into the ambulance, Ben understood something profound. This war would end someday. The shooting would stop. The dying would cease. But what would remain was this: the choices they made, the mercy they showed, the humanity they preserved even when everything told them to abandon it. Reiko would survive. But more than that, she would remember. She would remember the American medic who ran toward her instead of away, who gave her medicine instead of poison, who chose to save her life when he could have let her die. And that memory, that single act of compassion on a dusty road in Saipan, would echo across decades, across continents, across a divide that seemed impossible to bridge. Because some victories aren't won with bullets, they're won with choices. And on that day, in that moment, Ben Cole chose mercy. He chose humanity. He chose to be American in the way that mattered most, not by defeating his enemy, but by showing them they were wrong to fear him. The hospital. The ambulance kicked up dust as it rolled through the gates of the 31st Medical Battalion Field Hospital. Ben Cole sat in the back, one hand on the stretcher rail to keep Reiko stable as they hit bumps in the road. Her eyes were closed now. The morphine had pulled her under. Not sleep exactly. Something between consciousness and darkness. Immersi. Captain Hayes drove, fast but controlled. Every medic learned to drive this way, quick enough to save lives, careful enough not to make things worse. Through the windshield, Ben could see the compound spreading out before them. 20 white tents arranged in precise military order, red crosses painted on every surface, the universal symbol of mercy, of healing, of the one place on a battlefield where the killing was supposed to stop. But mercy was complicated. Healing was a choice, and choices had consequences. The ambulance pulled up to the largest tent, the one marked surgery in block letters. Before Hayes could even cut the engine, 3 medics ran out. They'd been expecting an American casualty, someone from the line, someone who mattered. Instead, they saw Ben opening the back doors, saw the stretcher, saw Reiko's face. Japanese, female, enemy. The medics stopped. One of them, Corporal Martinez, actually took a step back. "Cole, what the hell is this?" Spinal compression, Ben said, jumping down from the ambulance. Needs immediate surgery. She's a Jap. She's a patient. Martinez looked at the other two medics, then back at Ben. We got 8 Americans waiting for surgery, 8 of our guys, and you bring us this. Hayes climbed out of the driver's side. He moved around to the back of the ambulance with the authority of a man who'd earned his rank through skill rather than time. You 3, stop standing there like civilians. Get her inside, now. They hesitated, just for a second. But in that second, Ben saw the calculation in their eyes. Duty versus prejudice. Orders versus emotion. The war had taught them who to save and who to let die. And this woman didn't fit the categories they'd been given. Hayes saw it too. His voice dropped lower, harder. That wasn't a suggestion. They moved, pulled the stretcher from the ambulance, carried Reiko toward the surgery tent. Ben followed. Behind him, he heard Martinez mutter something. Not quite under his breath, not quite loud enough to be insubordination. But loud enough. My brother died fighting Japs, and we're saving one. Inside the surgery tent, the chaos was organized, but barely. 8 cots lined the walls, all occupied, all American, shrapnel wounds, gunshots, burns. The lottery of war played out in broken bodies. Nurses moved between them, checking vitals, changing dressings, administering morphine to those who needed it, those who deserved it, or so the thinking went. When they wheeled Reiko in, every head turned. Conversation stopped. A nurse near the entrance, Lieutenant Sarah Anderson, walked over. She was 35. Massachusetts. Nursing school before the war. She'd seen things in the last 3 weeks that would have broken lesser people. But her face remained professional. Calm. The kind of calm that came from having no more shock left to feel. Captain, she said to Hayes, what do we have? Japanese civilian, nurse, spinal compression, probably L3, L4, bone fragments on the cord. She needs surgery or she's paralyzed. Anderson looked at Reiko, then at the 8 American soldiers, then back at Hayes. She didn't say what she was thinking. Didn't need to. The math was simple. Cruel but simple. 1 Japanese life versus 8 American lives. 1 enemy versus 8 friends. 1 stranger versus 8 sons. Hayes must have seen the calculation in her eyes too. I know what you're thinking. Don't. She's here. She's savable. We do our job. Sir, with respect, we have limited resources, limited time. Every hour you spend on her is an hour one of our boys waits. I'm aware of that, Lieutenant. But I'm also aware that we're not butchers. We're doctors. We don't choose based on uniform. Anderson held his gaze. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she nodded. Just once. I'll prep surgery. As Anderson moved away to gather supplies, Hayes pulled Ben aside. They stood near the entrance where the morning sun cut through the canvas in sharp lines. Outside, the normal sounds of the hospital continued. Ambulances arriving, orders being shouted, the distant crack of artillery that had become like white noise, background music to dying. Cole, Hayes said quietly, you understand what's about to happen. Surgery, sir? No, I mean after, when word gets out that I operated on a Japanese prisoner while American boys died waiting, when their families get letters, when the brass asks questions. Hayes paused, rubbed his face. He looked tired, more tired than Ben had ever seen him. Are you prepared for that? Ben thought about his father, about the cowboy boots he wore under his uniform, about his mother's cross around his neck, about the promise he'd made on that last morning in Texas. Do what's right, even when it's hard. Yes, sir, I'm prepared. Hayes studied him. Then something like respect flickered across his face. You know what I believe you are? Okay, I'll do the surgery. You assist. This is your call. You live with the consequences. They prepped Reiko for surgery, carefully, like they would any patient. Anderson and another nurse, younger, newer, cut away Reiko's torn dress, covered her with a clean white sheet, the kind of dignity that seemed impossible in war but remained necessary nonetheless. Ben helped transfer her from the stretcher to the operating table, his hands supporting her head and neck, Hayes supporting her torso, moving as one unit, practiced, professional. Hayes examined Reiko's spine more thoroughly now, his fingers probing, feeling, reading the story her body told. After a minute, he stepped back. It's bad. Bone fragments from L3 are pressing directly on the spinal cord. I need to remove them, decompress the nerve. If I don't do it perfectly, she's paralyzed. If I rush, she dies on the table. How long? Ben asked. 6 hours, maybe 7. Outside the surgery tent, Corporal Davis poked his head in. Captain Colonel Patterson wants to see you. Hayes didn't look up from his examination. Tell him I'm in surgery. He said, now, sir. Then he can wait. I'm busy. Davis disappeared. Hayes looked at Ben. This is already starting. You ready? Ben nodded. The surgery began at 0900 hours. Reiko was placed under full anesthesia, ether administered through a mask, her breathing regulated by Anderson's careful monitoring. Hayes made the first incision. Clean, precise, the scalpel moving through skin and muscle with the confidence of a man who'd done this hundreds of times. Ben assisted, handing instruments, suctioning blood, holding retractors. His role was support, but support mattered. One wrong move and Hayes's precision would be wasted. One slip and Reiko would die, or worse, live, but never walk again. As Hayes worked exposing the vertebrae, finding the fracture, beginning the delicate process of removing bone fragments from around the spinal cord, Ben's mind wandered. Not far, just back to Texas, back to training, back to the moment that had led him here. He remembered his first day at Fort Sam Houston. Combat medic training. The instructor, a grizzled sergeant with 30 years and standing at the front of the classroom. Behind him a poster, the Hippocratic Oath in bold letters. First, do no harm. The sergeant had pointed at it. Gentlemen, this is your religion now. Not Methodist, not Baptist, not Catholic. These 4 words. They mean you save lives, all lives, even enemy lives. You got a problem with that, you're in the wrong course. A kid from Alabama, couldn't have been more than 18, raised his hand. Sergeant, what if we have to choose? What if it's one of ours versus one of theirs? The sergeant had smiled, not kindly. Son, if you're in a position where you have to choose, you've already failed. A good medic doesn't let it get to that point. A good medic saves everyone, or dies trying. Ben had believed that then, still believed it now. Even as Hayes extracted the 3rd bone fragment, even as Anderson wiped sweat from Hayes's forehead, even as 6 hours became 7 and the American soldiers outside continued to wait. Finally, Hayes stepped back. That's it. Spinal cord is decompressed. No visible damage to the nerve itself. If I'm right, she'll walk again. If you're right, Ben asked, this isn't an exact science, Cole. Bodies are complicated. War makes them more so. But I did everything I could. Now we wait and see if it was enough. They closed Reiko up, sutured the incision, bandaged the wound, moved her to a recovery cot. Her vitals were stable, breathing regular. The surgery was a success, technically, medically. But the other kind of success, the kind that came from acceptance and understanding, that remained to be seen. The waiting. While Reiko was in surgery, the 14 other Japanese women sat in a waiting tent. They'd been given benches, told to stay put. A guard stood at the entrance, young, nervous, PFC Jackson, who'd been on the road earlier. He didn't know what to do with prisoners who were women, who were frightened, who looked at him like he might shoot them at any moment. Haruko sat with her hands in her lap. She kept touching the spot on her arm where Ben had shown her the morphine syringe, kept remembering his face, the way he'd run toward Reiko instead of away, the way he'd fought to make them understand. The American words she didn't know, but the tone, the intention, those had been clear. Amiko, the older woman, the teacher who'd spent 2 years in California before the war, sat beside Haruko. She was quiet, thinking, processing, everything she'd been told about Americans, everything she'd seen today. The two didn't match, couldn't match. One of them had to be a lie. Fumiko sat apart from the others. She was 28, a widow. Her husband had died at Midway, died fighting Americans, died hating them. She promised herself she'd hate them too, die hating them if necessary. But hate required certainty, and certainty was becoming harder to hold. Lieutenant Anderson appeared in the tent entrance. The women tensed. This was it. Whatever came next. Death, torture, the fulfillment of every warning they'd received. Anderson carried a box. Wood. Heavy. She set it down on the ground in front of them. Food, she said in English. The word meant nothing to them, so she opened the box. Inside, cans, packages, things wrapped in brown paper. She pulled one out, a can with a picture of meat. She opened it with a can opener from her pocket. The smell hit the tent immediately. Meat, real meat, processed and canned, but real. Anderson took a fork from her pocket, took a small bite, swallowed, smiled, then held the can out to the nearest woman. Kimiko, 30 years old, mother of 2 children who'd died in the bombing. Kimiko stared at the can, at Anderson, at the fork. Eat, Anderson said, making the motion. Fork to mouth. It's okay, eat. Kimiko took the can, the fork, her hands shaking. She lifted a small piece of meat to her mouth, tasted it. Her eyes went wide. She took another bite, then another. Then she started crying. Not from sadness, from the shock of something good in a world that had been only bad for so long. Anderson opened more cans, set them out. Crackers, chocolate bars, canned peaches, Spam. Things the women hadn't seen in months, in some cases years. Japan had been starving its civilians to feed its military, had been rationing everything to nothing, had been telling them to sacrifice for the emperor, to die with honor rather than live with shame. But here was food, given freely, given to prisoners, given by the enemy who was supposed to be cruel, supposed to be savage, supposed to let them starve. The women ate, slowly at first, then faster as hunger overcame fear. Haruko opened a can of peaches, the syrup sweet and thick. She ate them one by one, crying with each bite. Fumiko took chocolate, dark, rich. She let it melt on her tongue, tasted sweetness for the first time in forever. And Miko ate crackers, simple, plain, but they were whole, not moldy, not mixed with sawdust or dirt, not stretched to feed 10 people instead of one. Just crackers, perfect crackers, the way food was supposed to be. Anderson watched them eat. Her face showed something the women would later understand as sadness. Not for them, for what had been done to them, for the starvation that could have been prevented, for the lies they'd been told. She left and returned with a metal pitcher, water, cold water. She poured it into metal cups, handed them out. The women drank like they'd been lost in a desert. Like water was the first mercy, the first proof that maybe possibly they weren't going to die today. After they ate, Anderson gestured for them to follow, led them to another tent, smaller. Inside cots, real cots with mattresses and blankets, clean blankets, American military issue, olive drab, rough but clean, and on each cot folded neatly a cotton dress. Simple, plain, but new, whole, not torn or stained or held together with desperate stitching. Anderson pointed to another tent nearby, made a washing motion. Shower, she said. The word was English, but the gesture was universal. Water, soap, clean. The 14 women looked at each other. This had to be a trick. Had to be. Enemies didn't give food, didn't give clothes, didn't give the dignity of being clean. Enemies took, destroyed, killed. That's what enemies did. But Amiko remembered California, remembered Americans before the war, remembered that they'd been kind, generous, open. Had that all been lies? Or had the war been the lie? Had the propaganda been the lie? Had everything they'd been told been backwards? She was the first to go to the shower tent. The others followed. Inside canvas walls, wooden benches, hooks for clothes, and at the far end pipes, water falling from them, steam rising, hot water, the kind of luxury that had disappeared from their lives so long ago, they'd almost forgotten it existed. Haruko was the first under the spray. The water hit her and she gasped, hot, clean, washing away dirt and blood and fear. She stood there for a long time, just stood. Let the water do its work. Let it wash away the road in the heat, in the certainty that she was going to die. The others joined, 14 women under 14 streams of water. Some scrubbed their skin until it was raw, trying to wash away more than dirt, trying to wash away memory, trying to wash away everything that had happened, everything they'd lost. Fumiko stood under her stream with her eyes closed, water running through her hair, down her back, over her hands. She'd held her husband's letter when he died, had kept it with her through everything. But she'd lost it somewhere, on the road maybe, or in the cave where they'd hidden, or in the moment of surrender. It was gone. And now she was here, under American water, in an American camp, eating American food. And she didn't know how to feel about any of it. When they emerged wrapped in towels that had been left for them, they found the cotton dresses. Each woman took one, put it on. The fabric was soft, clean, smelled like detergent, a normal smell, a peacetime smell, a smell that didn't belong in war. They returned to the tent with the queen, lay down. Some fell asleep immediately, exhaustion finally catching up. Others lay awake, staring at the canvas ceiling, trying to reconcile what they'd been told with what they'd experienced. The cognitive dissonance was painful, worse than hunger, worse than fear, because it meant everything they'd believed was wrong. And if that was wrong, what else was wrong? What else had been lies? The awakening. Reiko opened her eyes to white canvas, white light, white ceiling above her. And for a moment, she thought she was dead, thought this was the afterlife. But then pain registered. Dull, manageable, but present. And the dead didn't feel pain. She tried to remember. The road, the collapse, the American medic, the needle, then nothing. How long had it been? Hours, days? She had no way to know. Time had become elastic, unreliable. She tried to move her toes, concentrated, willed them to respond, and they did. They moved, just a little, just enough. But they moved. She could feel them, could feel her legs, could feel everything. Tears came, not from pain, from relief, from the impossible realization that she wasn't paralyzed, that whatever the Americans had done, it had worked. A figure appeared beside her cot. Ben Cole. She recognized him immediately, the young medic from the road. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, uniform wrinkled, like he'd been up for days. He saw she was awake, and something like happiness crossed his face. "Hey," he said. The word meant nothing to her, but the tone was gentle, reassuring. He checked her pulse, put his fingers on her wrist, counted. Professional. Then he pulled a small flashlight from his pocket, shined it in her eyes, checking her pupils, making sure everything was working the way it should. He seemed satisfied, smiled. Then he did something unexpected. He poured water from a metal pitcher into a cup, held it out to her, gestured, "Drink." Reiko tried to sit up. Pain shot through her back. Ben immediately moved to help, one hand behind her shoulders, supporting her, careful not to touch anywhere that might hurt. He lifted her just enough that she could drink without choking. The water was cool, pure, better than anything she'd tasted in months. She drank the whole cup. Ben poured another. She drank that too. Then he lowered her back down, gentle, careful, like she was fragile, like she mattered. She tried to speak. "Arigato." Thank you. It was all she could say, all that seemed adequate, though no words seemed adequate for what he'd done. "You're welcome," Ben said. He didn't understand her words either, but they understood each other anyway. Some things transcended language. Ben reached into his pocket, pulled out a photograph, black and white, creased, worn. He showed it to Reiko, a family, standing in front of a ranch house. Man, woman, young boy, Texas somewhere, the American heartland. "My family," Ben said, pointing at the figures. "Mama, Papa, me." He pointed at himself, then at the boy in the photo, making the connection. "This is where I come from. This is who I am." Reiko looked at the photo, at these people who'd raised the man who saved her, who'd taught him to run towards suffering instead of away from it, who'd given him whatever it was inside that made him choose mercy. She wanted to thank them, to tell them they'd raised a good son, a son who'd saved her life for no reason other than it was the right thing to do. But all she could do was nod and cry, because the weight of what he'd done was settling on her now. Not just the surgery, the choice. He'd chosen her life over easier alternatives, had chosen to see her as human when everything in war said she was the enemy. And that choice had cost him something. She could see it in his tired eyes, in the tension in his shoulders, in the way he kept glancing toward the tent entrance like he was expecting trouble. Ben put the photo away, pulled a blanket up over her, tucked it in slightly. Then he said something else. More English words she didn't understand, but the meaning was clear. Rest, you're safe. I'll be nearby. He stood to leave. Reiko reached out, caught his hand. He stopped, looked back. She held his hand for just a moment, trying to communicate everything she couldn't say. Thank you. I was wrong about you. About all of you. I'm sorry. I'm grateful. I'll remember this. Ben squeezed her hand once, then gently pulled away. He had other patients, other duties, but he'd be back. She could see that in his face. He'd check on her, make sure she healed, make sure the surgery he'd fought for wasn't wasted. After he left, Reiko lay in the recovery tent and looked around. Other cots, other patients, all American soldiers, wounded, bandaged, sleeping or reading or staring at nothing. And here she was, enemy, prisoner, Japanese, lying in the same tent, receiving the same care, the same medicine, the same mercy. It didn't make sense. Not in the world she'd been taught to understand. In that world, Americans were demons, cruel, savage. They tortured prisoners, raped women, killed for sport. That's what she'd been told. What everyone had been told. It's why so many had jumped from the cliffs. Why families had killed their children rather than let them fall into American hands. But it was all lies, all of it. The Americans weren't demons. They were just men, tired men, scared men, men who'd been asked to fight a war they probably didn't fully understand. But men who, when given the choice between cruelty and compassion, chose compassion. And if that was true, if everything she'd been told was backwards, then what about the war itself? What about the emperor? What about the divine mission? And what about the promise that Japan would never surrender? That death was preferable to defeat? What if all of it was lies? The thought was terrifying. More terrifying than the collapse on the road. More terrifying than the pain. Because if the foundation of everything she believed was false, then she had to rebuild her entire understanding of the world. Had to start over. Had to figure out what was real and what was propaganda. What was truth and what was manipulation. It was too much, too overwhelming. So she closed her eyes and let exhaustion take her. Let her body heal while her mind tried to process the impossible. She slept, and while she slept outside the recovery tent, the consequences of her salvation were about to land on Ben Cole like artillery fire. The consequences: Colonel Patterson's tent smelled like cigars and coffee. He sat behind a field desk covered in maps and reports and the endless paperwork of war. He was 50 years old, career military, had served in the Great War, had seen things that still woke him up at night. But he was also a man who believed in order, in hierarchy, in the clear lines that separated right from wrong, us from them, acceptable from unacceptable. Captain Hayes stood at attention in front of the desk. Ben Cole stood beside him, both waiting. Patterson let them wait, took a long drag from his cigar, exhaled smoke toward the tent ceiling. Finally spoke. Captain Hayes, Sergeant Cole, do you want to tell me what the hell happened today? Hayes kept his voice level, professional. Sir, we performed emergency surgery on a Japanese civilian. Spinal compression. Successful outcome. Patient will likely recover full mobility. While 8 American soldiers waited for treatment. Those 8 soldiers had non-critical injuries, sir. Treatable, but not urgent. The Japanese woman was urgent. Without immediate intervention, she would have been permanently paralyzed. Patterson set his cigar in an ashtray, leaned back in his chair. Let me make sure I understand this. You chose to operate on a Japanese prisoner for 6 hours while American boys bled. Sir, those boys were stabilized. They weren't bleeding out. They were waiting for surgery, yes, but they could wait. She couldn't. One of them died. Silence. Heavy, suffocating. Hayes's face went white. Who? Private Johnson. Private. 19, Iowa. Internal bleeding. Died at 1600 hours while you were busy saving a Jap. Ben felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Johnson, the farm kid, blonde hair, freckles, talked about his girlfriend back home. showed everyone her picture, talked about marrying her when the war ended. He'd been waiting for surgery, had been stable when Ben left. But stable wasn't the same as safe, and clearly something had gone wrong. Hayes found his voice. Sir Johnson's injuries were catastrophic, massive internal trauma. Even if I'd been available immediately, the outcome would likely have been the same. Likely, but not certain. And that uncertainty is the problem, Captain. Because now I have to write a letter to Johnson's mother, have to tell her that her son died. And if she asks why there was a delay in treatment, what do I tell her? That we were too busy saving the enemy. You tell her the truth, sir. That her son died fighting for a country that values every human life. That even in war, we maintain our principles. That's what separates us from them. Patterson stood up, walked around the desk. He was shorter than Hayes, but somehow seemed larger in that moment. Principles don't bring Private Johnson home. Principles don't comfort his mother. Principles are a luxury we can't afford in the middle of a war. Ben spoke before he could stop himself. Sir, permission to speak. Patterson turned to him. What, Cole, sir? I was raised to believe America is different, that we're better, not because we're stronger, but because we value life, all life. If we start choosing who deserves to live based on their uniform, we become like them. We lose what makes us worth fighting for. Patterson studied Ben for a long moment. How old are you, Sergeant? 22, sir. 22. And you think you understand war better than men who've been fighting for decades? No, sir. But I understand what my country stands for, what my parents taught me, what I swore to uphold when I put on this uniform. And what's that? That every person has value, that mercy isn't weakness, that we judge ourselves not by how we treat our friends, but by how we treat our enemies. Patterson turned back to Hayes. Is this what you're teaching your medics? Bleeding heart liberalism. Hayes straightened. No, sir. I'm teaching them the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. That oath doesn't have a nationality clause. It doesn't say save only Americans. It says save who you can save. And today that was a Japanese woman. Patterson walked back to his desk, sat down, picked up his cigar, took another drag. The silence stretched out. Finally, he spoke. Fine, but this doesn't happen again. Next time, Americans first, always. Is that understood? Yes, sir, Hayes said. And Cole, you're lucky I don't court-martial you for wasting military resources. Consider this your only warning. Understood, sir? Dismissed. They saluted, turned to leave. But at the tent entrance, Patterson called after them. Hayes, sir. Earl, how's the Japanese woman doing? Hayes hesitated. She'll walk again, sir. Full recovery expected. Patterson nodded slowly. Good, because if she'd died after all this, I'd have had you both shot. Outside the tent, Ben and Hayes walked in silence. The sun was setting, orange light across the compound, the sounds of the hospital continuing around them. The war didn't stop for moral debates, didn't pause for ethical questions. It just kept grinding forward, consuming everyone in its path. Finally, Hayes spoke. That was stupid, Cole. Speaking up like that. You almost got yourself court-martialed. But we did the right thing. Maybe, but doing the right thing doesn't always protect you from the consequences. Hayes paused, looked at Ben. You know what the real problem is? Johnson might have died anyway. But now we'll never know for certain, and that doubt will follow us, not just today, forever. I can live with doubt, sir. Can you live with wondering if you chose wrong? If American boys died because you wanted to prove a point? Ben thought about that, about Johnson, about his mother who'd get a letter, about his girlfriend who'd wait for a man who'd never come home, about the weight of choices made in impossible circumstances. I don't know, sir, but I know I couldn't live with letting that woman die when I could save her. I'd rather carry the doubt than the certainty of my own cruelty. Hayes smiled. Just a little. Just enough. You know what, Cole? You remind me of why I became a doctor in the first place. For the politics. Before the war. When it was just about helping people. He clapped Ben on the shoulder. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll check on your patient. Make sure the surgery took. Yes, sir. As Hayes walked away, Ben stood alone in the fading light. Around him, the hospital continued its work. Saving some, losing others. doing the impossible calculus of war where every choice had a cost and every cost was paid in blood. He touched the cross around his neck, his mother's cross, thought about what she'd asked him to do, what his father had taught him, what America was supposed to represent, and he realized something. He'd made his choice. Right or wrong, it was his. And he'd have to live with it, but at least he could live with it. At least he hadn't abandoned his principles when they were tested. At least he'd chosen to see a human being instead of an enemy, a life worth saving instead of a war worth winning. That had to count for something. In the grand scheme of things, in the final accounting when this war ended and everyone went home, it had to count. Because if it didn't, if mercy was weakness and compassion was failure, then what exactly were they fighting for? The bridge. The next morning brought Private David Yamamoto. He arrived on a supply truck from division headquarters. 24 years old, second generation. His parents had been born in Hiroshima, but he'd been born in Sacramento. Grew up eating hamburgers and playing baseball. Spoke perfect English with a California accent. Spoke perfect Japanese with his grandmother's dialect. He was a walking contradiction to everything the propaganda had promised. A Japanese face in an American uniform. Proof that identity was more complicated than blood. Ben met him at the gate, shook his hand. "Thanks for coming. We need help communicating with some prisoners." Yamamoto looked around the compound, at the organized chaos of the field hospital, at the red crosses and white tents and American flags. "How many prisoners?" 15, women civilians. One of them needed emergency surgery. The others are scared. They don't understand why we're helping them. Yamamoto nodded slowly, understanding more than just the words, understanding the deeper problem. "They think you are going to kill them." Something like that. Because that's what they were told, that Americans are demons, that surrender means torture and death. Yamamoto's face was expressionless, but his voice carried weight. "My parents believed that too, when they heard about Pearl Harbor, when they realized war was coming. They were terrified, not of what Japan would do, but of what Americans would do to people who looked like them." What happened? They were sent to Manzanar, internment camp, lost everything, house, business, savings, but they weren't tortured, weren't killed, just imprisoned. And you know what my father said after he said, at least America had rules, at least America felt guilty? Japan wouldn't have even pretended to be sorry. Ben didn't know what to say to that. The internment camps were something people didn't talk about much, something uncomfortable, something that proved America wasn't always better, wasn't always right. But Yamamoto seemed to have made peace with the contradiction, seemed to understand that countries were like people, capable of both good and evil, sometimes at the same time. They walked to the women's tent. Inside, the 14 women sat on their cots. They'd been given breakfast that morning, powdered eggs and toast and coffee, real coffee, the kind of meal that seemed impossible in a world of rationing and starvation. They'd eaten slowly, carefully, still not quite believing it was real. When Yamamoto walked in wearing his American uniform, the reaction was immediate. Shock, confusion, a Japanese man in enemy colors, fighting for the other side. It was like seeing a ghost, or a traitor, or something their minds couldn't quite process. Yamamoto stood at the center of the tent, looked at each woman, then spoke in Japanese, his voice clear, calm, the words flowing naturally. "My name is David Yamamoto. I'm a private in the United States Army. I was born in California. I'm here to help you understand what's happening." Silence. Then Emiko spoke. The teacher, the one who'd been to California. "You're Japanese. By blood, yes. By nationality, no. I'm American. But you fight against Japan, against your own people. Japan attacked my country. I'm defending my country. These two things aren't opposites." Fumiko stood up, her face angry. "My husband died fighting people like you, traitors who chose America over their ancestors." Yamamoto didn't flinch. "I'm sorry for your loss. War creates orphans and widows on both sides. But I'm not a traitor. I'm loyal to the country that gave my family opportunity, that gave me freedom, that values me as a person rather than a tool of the state." America put your family in camps, Fumiko shot back. Don't pretend they see you as equal. They did, and it was wrong, but they also felt guilty about it. They also questioned it. In Japan, would anyone have questioned the emperor? Would anyone have protested? Or would they have just obeyed? More silence, because the answer was obvious. In Japan, you didn't question. You didn't protest. You obeyed or you died. Ben stepped forward. Tell them why I saved their friend. Tell them I need them to understand. Yamamoto translated, then listened as Ben spoke, his words slow, deliberate, giving Yamamoto time to convert them into Japanese. I know you're scared. I know you were told we're monsters, that we would torture and kill you. But I want you to understand something. Ben paused, pulled off his boots, the cowboy boots his father had given him, held them up so everyone could see. These boots, my father gave them to me. He's a cowboy in Texas. He taught me that you judge a man by how he treats those who can't fight back. You were defenseless. We could have left you to die, but we didn't. Not because we're soft, because we're American. Yamamoto translated. The women listened, some skeptical, some curious, all confused. Being American isn't about where you're born, Ben continued. It's about what you believe. We believe every person has value, every life matters, even enemy lives, especially enemy lives, because anyone can be kind to friends. It takes character to be kind to enemies. Haruko spoke up, her voice quiet but steady. Why did you save Reiko? She's nothing to you. Ben looked at Yamamoto, waited for the translation, then answered. She's not nothing. She's a nurse, like me. She chose to save lives, like me. The only difference between us is the uniform we were told to wear. And I don't believe uniforms should decide who lives and who dies. Emiko stood up, walked closer to Ben, studied his face. In California before the war, I taught English. Americans were kind to me. But then the war started, and I was told everything I'd seen was lies. That Americans were secretly cruel, that kindness was just a mask. She paused. Which version is true? Ben met her eyes. Both, and neither. Americans are people. Some are kind, some are cruel. Most are somewhere in between, just like Japanese people, just like everyone. War doesn't change that. It just forces us to choose which version of ourselves we want to be. Yamamoto finished translating, then added his own words in Japanese. I've served with these men for 6 months. I've seen them tired, scared, angry. I've seen them at their worst. And you know what? Even at their worst, they try to be decent. They don't always succeed, but they try. And that trying matters. The conversation continued for another hour. Questions and answers, doubts and reassurances. Slowly, carefully, the bridge was being built. Not trust yet. Trust took time, but understanding. The beginning of a realization that maybe possibly everything they had been told was backwards. The walk 1 week later, Reiko was ready for physical therapy. Her incision had healed cleanly. The stitches would come out soon. But the real test was mobility. Could she stand? Could she walk? Had the surgery truly worked, or had they just postponed the inevitable? Ben and Lieutenant Anderson set up parallel bars in a corner of the recovery tent. Simple, functional. The kind of equipment that existed in every rehabilitation facility. The kind that represented the difference between independence and helplessness. They helped Reiko from her cot. She was stronger now. A week of real food had put color back in her cheeks. But she was still weak, still uncertain. Her legs had feeling, but feeling wasn't the same as function. Ben positioned himself on one side, Anderson on the other. Between them, Reiko gripped the parallel bars, her knuckles white with tension, her breath coming fast. Not from exertion, from fear. What if her legs didn't work? What if all of this, the surgery and the care and the kindness, had been for nothing? Ready? Ben asked. Yamamoto, who'd been staying at the hospital to help translate, converted the words to Japanese. Reiko nodded, not trusting herself to speak. On 3, we're just going to help you stand. That's all, 1 step at a time. 1, 2, 3. They lifted, gently, supporting her weight. Reiko's legs straightened, held. She was standing, actually standing, for the first time in a week. The feeling was overwhelming. Joy and terror mixed together. She could stand, but could she stay standing? Good, Ben said, his voice calm, steady, the voice of someone who'd done this before, who knew that confidence was contagious. Now we're going to let go. Just for a second, the bars will hold you. Ready? Reiko gripped tighter. Nodded again. Ben and Anderson stepped back. Just slightly. Just enough. Reiko stood alone. Her legs shaking. Her whole body trembling. But standing. Under her own power. Using her own strength. Okay, Ben said. Now one step. Just one. Slide your right foot forward. 6 inches. That's all. Reiko looked down at her feet. Commanded her right leg to move. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly and possibly, her foot slid forward. 6 inches, maybe 7, but forward. The 10 erupted. Wounded American soldiers who'd been watching, nurses who'd paused their work, medics who'd gathered to see. Everyone clapped, cheered, like she'd won a race instead of taking one small step. Like this moment mattered as much as any battle. Reiko looked up, tears streaming down her face. She'd moved. She'd actually moved. Her legs worked. The surgery had worked. Ben had been right. Captain Hayes had been right. She was going to walk again. Again, Ben said, smiling now, unable to hide his own relief. Left foot this time. Left foot forward, 6 inches, then right again, then left. Step by step, inch by inch. The length of the parallel bars, 10 feet that felt like 10 miles. And when she reached the end, when she completed the journey, the applause was deafening. Haruko, who'd been allowed to watch from the entrance, ran forward, grabbed Reiko's hand through the bars, said something in rapid Japanese, something about miracles and hope and the impossibility of kindness. Reiko squeezed back, unable to speak, too overwhelmed by emotion. One of the American soldiers, a private from Ohio who was missing his left leg below the knee, called out from his cot. Hell yeah, if she can walk, maybe I can too. The comment was meant as encouragement, as solidarity, but it represented something deeper, something profound. In that moment in that tent, there was no enemy, no us versus them, just people trying to heal, people trying to survive, people trying to find hope in a world designed to crush it. Ben helped Reiko turn around, ready for the walk back. But she paused, looked at him, then said in careful broken English, "Thank you, America." The words were simple, imperfect, but they carried weight. Not just thanks for the surgery, thanks for the choice, thanks for seeing her as human, thanks for proving that mercy existed even in war. Ben felt something catch in his throat. No, ma'am, he managed. Thank you. You reminded me why we're fighting. Not to destroy, to protect, to heal. Captain Hayes watched from the entrance, arms crossed, face thoughtful. Lieutenant Anderson stood beside him. You know what just happened? Hayes asked quietly. What, sir? We won a battle. Not with guns, with decency. And that's the kind of victory that lasts. Anderson nodded. Do you think she'll remember this when she goes home? I think she'll never forget it. And maybe someday when this war is over, she'll tell people. Tell them the truth about what happened here, about who Americans really are. And will they believe her? Hayes shrugged. Probably not, but she'll tell them anyway, because some truths are worth telling even when no one wants to hear them. The departure in November brought news. Repatriation arrangements had been finalized. The 15 women would be sent home through a neutral Swedish ship. The war was still raging, but certain channels remained open. Certain mercies still functioned. Prisoners could be exchanged. Civilians could be returned. Even in the midst of total war, some small corner of humanity persisted. The announcement came on a Tuesday. The women had mixed reactions. Relief at going home. Fear of what home had become. Sadness at leaving the one place in months where they'd felt safe, where they'd been fed, where they'd been treated like humans instead of burdens. Ben found out from Hayes. They were doing rounds in the recovery tent when Hayes mentioned it casually. Too casually. Like he was trying to make it seem less significant than it was. The Japanese women are being repatriated next week. Ben stopped walking. All of them. All of them, including your patient. She's healed enough for travel. Does she know? Yamamoto told them this morning. Ben felt something twist in his chest. He'd known this was coming. Had to come. But knowing didn't make it easier. Reiko would leave, would go back to Japan, and he'd never see her again. Never know if she made it home safely. Never know what happened to her after. That afternoon, he went to the women's tent, found Reiko sitting on her cot. She was stronger now, could walk with only a slight limp, could move without pain. The surgery had been a complete success, medically speaking, but success was complicated. Yamamoto translated as Ben spoke. "I heard you're leaving next week." Reiko nodded. "Yes, going home." "How do you feel about that?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. Happy to leave war. Scared of what I'll find. Japan is being bombed. Cities burning. Maybe my family is dead. Maybe there's nothing left." "I hope that's not true. I hope you find them safe." "Me too," she paused. "But even if they're gone, I have something now. Something I didn't have before." "What's that truth?" "I know the truth now about Americans, about war, about everything I was told." She looked directly at Ben. "And I'll tell people. When I go home, I'll tell them what you did, what all of you did. They won't believe me, but I'll tell them anyway." Ben reached into his bag. He'd prepared something, had been working on it for days. "I want to give you some things for the journey." He pulled out items one by one. A care package assembled with care, with intention. First chocolate bars, 10 Hershey bars in brown wrappers. "For the ship, for after, so you remember." Reiko took them, held them like treasures. Chocolate had become more than food. It had become a symbol of plenty, of kindness, of the impossible generosity of a nation at war. Second, a small American flag, handkerchief size, folded carefully. "I know this is the enemy flag, but maybe someday it won't be. Maybe someday it'll just be a flag. And when you see it, you'll remember this place, these people, what we tried to be." Reiko took the flag, unfolded it, looked at the stars and stripes, the red and white and blue that had represented terror for so long, but now represented something else, something more complicated, something that included both bombs and medicine, both war and mercy. Third, a piece of paper, his address, written in careful handwriting. "When the war ends, write to me. Let me know you're okay. Let me know you made it." Reiko looked at the address, Cole Ranch, West Texas, United States of America, a place she'd never see, a place she could barely imagine, but a place that had sent its son to save her life. That mattered. Fourth, and most important, an envelope, inside documents, her medical records, x-rays, surgery notes, all translated into Japanese by Yamamoto, and a letter. Ben had written it himself, had Yamamoto translate it, had both of them sign it. Yamamoto read the letter aloud in Japanese so Reiko could hear, "To whom it may concern." This woman, Reiko Tanaka, was a patient at the 31st Medical Battalion Field Hospital, Saipan. She received spinal decompression surgery performed by Captain Robert Hayes and was treated with the same care and medicine as any American soldier. She is brave, she is strong, she survived, and she deserves to know that Americans value every human life. Signed, Sergeant Benjamin Cole, Captain Robert Hayes, United States Army. Reiko held the letter, read it herself, her hands shaking. This was proof, actual proof. Not just her word against everyone else's, but documentation, evidence, the kind of thing that couldn't be dismissed as easily as a story. "Why?" she asked. "Why do all this?" Ben thought about his answer, about his father and his mother, about Texas and promises, about the choice he'd made on a dusty road and every choice since, because it's the truth. And someday people need to hear it. Maybe not now, maybe not for years, but someday. The goodbye. The morning they left was gray, clouds hanging low, threatening rain that never came. The 15 women gathered by the transport truck. They wore the cotton dresses they'd been given, carried small bags with their few possessions, looked healthier than when they'd arrived, but still fragile, still marked by what they'd survived. The hospital staff came to say goodbye. Captain Hayes, Lieutenant Anderson, various nurses and medics who'd helped care for them, and Ben. Always Ben, the medic who'd started everything, who'd made the choice that changed their lives. Hayes shook hands with Emiko, the teacher, the one who spoke English. "Tell people," he said, Tell them Americans can be enemies in war, but friends in peace. Emiko nodded. I will, even if they don't believe me. Especially if they don't believe you. That's when truth matters most. Lieutenant Anderson hugged Haruko, the young nurse, the one who'd been so protective of Reiko. Stay strong, honey. The world needs women like you. Women who care. Haruko hugged back, crying, not from sadness, from the overwhelming realization that kindness existed, that even in the worst of times, people could choose to be good. Yamamoto spoke with Fumiko, the widow, the one who'd been most resistant, most angry, most certain that Americans were evil. Your husband died bravely, Yamamoto said in Japanese. Honor him by living honestly, by telling the truth even when it's hard. Fumiko looked at him, this Japanese man in an American uniform, this walking contradiction to everything she'd believed. Do you ever regret it? Choosing America. Every day, Yamamoto admitted. But I also know I made the right choice, because America, for all its flaws, allows me to regret, allows me to question. In Japan, would I have that freedom? Fumiko had no answer, because they both knew the truth. Finally, Ben and Reiko, they stood facing each other. So much to say, no way to say it. Language barrier, time pressure, the weight of everything unspoken. Ben spoke first, Yamamoto translating. Take care of yourself, walk every day, stay strong. I will, because of you. You gave me my life back. You gave me something too. You reminded me what we're fighting for, what America should be. Not what it is, but what it could be. Reiko stepped forward, did something unexpected. Hugged him. A quick embrace, arms around him briefly, then stepped back. Proper, respectful, but the gesture had been made, the connection acknowledged. I will never forget, she said. In English, the words careful but clear. Never. I won't either. The women climbed into the truck, sat on the wooden benches. The canvas cover was rolled back so they could see out. Could see the hospital one last time. Could see the white tents with red crosses. Could see the American flag flying overhead. Could see the men who'd saved them. The truck started, pulled away. The women waved, some crying, some silent, but the whole changed, carrying back to Japan something impossible. The truth about their enemy, the knowledge that hatred was taught, that compassion was a choice, that even in war humanity could survive. Ben watched until the truck disappeared, until the dust settled, until there was nothing left but memory. Hayes put a hand on his shoulder. Think you'll ever see her again? No, Ben said honestly. Probably not. But she'll remember. Yeah, she'll remember. And for Ben Cole, that had to be enough. He'd made his choice, had saved a life when it would have been easier to let it end, had shown mercy when war demanded cruelty, had chosen to be human when humanity seemed impossible. That was his victory. Not a battle won, not ground taken, but a life preserved, a truth demonstrated, a bridge built across a divide that seemed unbridgeable. Years later, when people asked him about the war, he never talked about the fighting, never talked about the blood or the fear of the friends he'd lost. He talked about her, about the Japanese nurse who collapsed on a road, about the choice he'd made, about the 6-hour surgery, about the moment she walked again. Because that was the story worth telling. Not how many enemies he'd helped kill, but the one enemy he'd helped save 50 years later. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in October, 1994. Ben Cole, now 72 years old, walked to his mailbox at the end of the long driveway. The ranch looked the same as it had 50 years ago. Same house, same barn, same endless Texas sky. His parents were long gone. His wife had passed 2 years before. But the land remained, constant, unchanged. The letter had Japanese characters on the envelope, careful handwriting, stamps he didn't recognize. He carried it inside, sat at the kitchen table where he'd eaten his last breakfast before the war, opened it carefully. Inside the letter was in English, translated, the handwriting shaky but legible. Dear Sergeant Cole, it has been 50 years. I do not know if you remember me. I was the Japanese nurse you saved on Saipan. You performed surgery on my spine. You gave me my life back. Ben stopped reading. His hands were shaking. 50 years, half a century, and she'd found him, had kept his address all this time, had waited until now to write. Why now? He kept reading. I am 72 now. I have lived a full life. I married. I had children. I became a doctor like you. I spent 40 years telling your story to anyone who would listen. Many people in Japan did not believe me. They said I was lying, that Americans could not be kind to enemies. But I never stopped telling the truth. Ben felt tears on his cheeks, didn't bother wiping them away, just kept reading. I kept your letter. I kept the medical records. And now finally people are listening. Japanese historians are documenting stories like mine. Stories that don't fit the simple narrative. Stories that complicate the past, make it messier, more human. I am writing to say thank you. Thank you for showing me that humanity exists even in war. Thank you for choosing mercy when you could have chosen hatred. Thank you for saving my life. I am coming to America next month. Medical conference in San Francisco. If possible, I would like to see you again, to say thank you in person. With deepest gratitude, Dr. Reiko Tanaka. Ben sat at the table for a long time, the letter in his hands, memories flooding back, the road, the collapse, the surgery, the goodbye, 50 years compressed into moments, into choices, into consequences he'd never fully understood. She'd become a doctor, had spent 40 years telling his story, had kept fighting for truth even when no one believed her, had remembered. After everything, after a lifetime, had remembered. He picked up the phone, called information, got the number for the medical conference in San Francisco, made arrangements. He'd drive, 8 hours. But he'd be there, had to be there. Because some stories don't end, they just pause. Wait, gather meaning across decades until the moment comes to close the circle. The reunion. The hotel lobby was crowded. Medical conference, doctors from around the world, name tags and briefcases, and the universal language of medicine being spoken in dozens of languages. Ben stood near the entrance, scanning faces, looking for someone he'd recognized from 50 years ago. But people change. Age transforms, turns the young into the old, the girl into the woman. Then he saw her, elderly, white hair, walking with a cane, but wearing something around her neck, a pin on her jacket. And as she got closer, he saw what it was. The American flag, the handkerchief-sized flag he'd given her, preserved for 50 years, worn now as a symbol, as a statement, as proof that some memories don't fade. Their eyes met, recognition instant despite the decades, despite the changes. Some connections transcend time. Reiko walked toward him, slowly, the slight limp still there, permanent reminder of the injury and the salvation. When she reached him, she stopped, looked up at his face, and smiled. Sergeant Cole, just Ben, please, just Ben. Ben, she tested the name, let it sit on her tongue. I wasn't sure you'd come. I wouldn't miss it, not for anything. They hugged, two old people, survivors of a war that had tried to make them enemies. That had failed because they'd chosen something else, something harder, something better. They found a quiet corner, sat, talked for hours, about the 50 years, about the lives they'd lived, about the people they'd become. Reiko told her story, the return to Japan, the devastation, the occupation, the slow rebuild, the difficulty of telling her story, the years of disbelief, the eventual acceptance as Japan began to reckon with its past, her children, her grandchildren, her career as a doctor, her commitment to teaching young doctors that medicine has no nationality, that patients are patients, that healing is universal. Ben told a story, finishing medical school on the GI Bill, becoming a country doctor, serving his community, his marriage, his children, his son who'd become a medic in the Gulf War, carrying forward the legacy, the choice to heal rather than harm. Did you face trouble, Reiko asked, when you came home for what you did? Ben thought about that. Some people didn't always understand why I'd saved a Japanese prisoner, why I'd risked American lives, but my parents understood, and that mattered most. My parents didn't understand, Reiko said quietly. They thought I should have died rather than surrender. But I had proof. She patted her bag. Your letter, the medical records. Eventually they accepted it. Eventually they were even proud. And now do people believe you? More than before, Japan has changed, slowly, painfully, but changed. We talk about the war differently now, more honestly. Your story, our story, it's part of that. Part of showing that enemies are human too. Ben reached into his pocket, pulled out a photograph. His family, his children and grandchildren. My daughter became a nurse. Because of you. Because I told her about the Japanese woman who showed me what courage looked like. Reiko looked at the photo, at Ben's legacy, at the lives that had come from his choice. You started something, a chain of kindness. You saved me. I saved others. Your daughter saves others. On and on, forever. That's the only victory that matters, Ben said. Not the war. Not the battles, but the ripples, the lives that continue, the choices that echo. They sat together until the sun set. Two old people who'd met in hell and found humanity, who'd been enemies and became something else. Not quite friends, something deeper, connected by a moment of mercy that had defined both their lives. When they finally said goodbye, when Reiko had to return to her conference and Ben had to drive back to Texas, they embraced one more time. Thank you, Reiko said, for everything, for my life, for my children, for the truth. Thank you, Ben replied, for remembering, for not letting the story die, for proving that what we did mattered. They never saw each other again after that day, but they wrote letters back and forth until Ben died in 2020, 99 years old, surrounded by family, at peace with his choices. Back to the beginning. Michael Cole sat in his father's barn, the Foot Locker still open, the letters spread around him, the photographs, the medical records, the flag, all the pieces of a story his father had kept quiet for decades. He understood now. Understood why his father never talked about being a hero. Because heroes don't think they're heroes. They think they're just people doing what needs to be done, making the choices that align with their values, living according to principles even when principles are costly. Michael picked up his phone, called his sister. I found something in Dad's Foot Locker, something important. We need to tell this story. What story? The one about who Dad really was, about what he did on Saipan, about the choice that defined his life. 6 months later, Michael stood in front of a camera, documentary crew. They were filming interviews with children of World War II veterans, preserving stories before they were lost, making sure the lessons survived. My father never talked about being a hero, Michael said to the camera, but I found letters from a Japanese woman he saved. And I realized something. Being American isn't about winning wars. It's about the choices we make even in war. It's about showing mercy when mercy seems impossible. It's about valuing life even when war demands death. He held up the American flag, the small one, the one Reiko had kept and then sent back after Ben died. Sent it with a note. He gave this to me in 1904. I kept it 50 years. Now I return it to his family. So they know, so they remember, so the story doesn't die. My father was 22 when he saved her life. Michael continued. 22 and asked to make impossible choices, kill or heal, hate or help, follow orders or follow conscience. And he chose mercy every time, not because it was easy, because it was right. That's what makes America great. Not our weapons, not our victories, but our willingness to see enemies as humans, to choose compassion over cruelty, to preserve our values even when the world is burning. My father died last year, but his story lives on in the lives he saved, in the doctors he inspired, in the grandson who's in medical school right now, in the chain of kindness that continues. Michael looked directly at the camera. In a world that teaches us to fear our enemies, my father taught me something different. The enemy is not the soldier on the other side. The enemy is the hatred that puts them there. And the greatest victory is not defeating your enemy. It's showing them they were wrong to fear you. The documentary aired 6 months later, went viral online. Comments flooded in. From veterans, from historians, from Japanese Americans, from people who'd never heard this version of the war. the version where mercy mattered, where choices defined character, where humanity survived despite everything. One comment stood out from a user in Tokyo. My grandmother told me this story about an American medic who saved her life. No one believed her. Now I know she was telling the truth. Thank you for preserving this. The user's name was Tanaka, Reiko's granddaughter. The chain continued. The story lived. The truth persisted. Because some stories are bigger than the people who live in them. Some choices echo across generations. Some moments of mercy become the foundation for peace. Ben Cole ran towards suffering instead of away from it, chose to heal instead of harm, saw a human being instead of an enemy, and in doing so he proved something essential about America, about what it means, about what it should be. Not perfect, not always right, but capable of choosing better, capable of mercy, capable of seeing enemies as future friends, capable of building bridges across divides that seem unbridgeable. That was his legacy. Not the war, not the battles, but the choice, the moment on a dusty road when he decided that some things were more important than victory, that humanity mattered more than hatred, that saving one life could mean more than winning 1,000 battles. And 50 years later, when an old Japanese doctor traveled across an ocean to say thank you, when she brought proof that his choice had mattered, when she showed him the ripples of his mercy spreading across decades, he understood something profound. Wars end. But the choices we make in them last forever. The hatred or the mercy, the cruelty or the compassion. The decision to see enemies as humans or humans as enemies. Ben Cole chose mercy, and in doing so he won the only victory that truly matters. Not over an enemy, but over the part of himself that might have chosen otherwise. Over the easy path of hatred. Over the simple narrative of us versus them. He chose the harder path, the path of seeing clearly, of acting justly, of preserving humanity when everything conspired to destroy it. That's what made him American. Not the uniform, not the flow, not the victory, the choice. Always the choice. To be better than the war demanded. To show mercy when mercy seemed impossible. To prove that even in humanity's darkest hours, light still finds a way. And that light once lit never goes out. It passes from person to person, from generation to generation, from enemies to friends to people who never knew there was a difference. That's the story, not of a war won, but of a choice made. And the echo of that choice across 50 years, across 2 lives, across the distance between enemy and friend, across the bridge built by mercy. That's the story worth telling, worth remembering, worth preserving. Because in the end, that's what makes us human, not the wars we fight, but the mercy we choose, even when it costs us everything, especially then.